All right, joining the show now is Elie Deglaoui and Bruce Veliz to preview the NBA Finals. How you boys doing today?
All right, man. Appreciate you having us on.
Yeah, doing good as always, Eamon. Thank you again for having us on for the pod and excited to discuss the NBA Finals. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Knicks and Spurs should be a ton of fun. Before we get into this matchup specifically, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about that Spurs Thunder series that we just saw, especially that Game 7 on Saturday, which was an absolute classic. And overall, this series was just an instant classic. But yeah, any major takeaways from this series? And then I guess projecting a little bit to the offseason with the Thunder, what moves do you think could be in the cards for them?
So overall, from this series, like you stated, Eamon, it's one of the best. And when I was watching this Game Seven, I like tweeted out like the fact that we get to see Wemby versus Shea go to Game Seven in the conference finals in year one is just automatically amazing for Wemby's first year making the playoffs. So I can't wait to see how this duel progresses as we get, into year four or year five when they've had these Western Conference Finals duels or semifinals duels where it's going 6 or 7. And you can clearly tell that both players really want to be the best in the league or the best in the West because that's kind of like the main discussion that was really happening on from this series. Obviously, Shea had his fantastic game seven as well. Really, in that second quarter, was not missing and really led the Thunder back into that game. I believe they had like a 13-2 run or 15-2 run, something like that. Shea was a big part of leading that Thunder team back. But unfortunately, Chet Holmgren just kind of faded away in that game seven. The big discourse there, obviously shying away from Wemby, and Wemby really stepped up in that moment where a lot of people, including us, were hyping him up this season to be a really solid player. Did not see this kind of trajectory for him and the Spurs kind of going to the NBA Finals in his first playoff appearance, and him winning Western Conference Finals MVP. There was also some big performances from guys like Dylan Harper in this series. You also had De'Aaron Fox have a pretty big game seven, which I know you have the jersey in the background, one of your favorite players. So I know you're really happy to see that. We also saw even Julian Champagnie really come through clutch throughout the entire playoffs as a key shooter and integrating himself into this Spurs rotation. It's just cool to see this young team make it this far. And for the Thunder, obviously, it was a little bit of a disastrous finish, but they had some injuries. No AJ Mitchell for most of the series. They obviously had no J Dub as well. So I don't think it's much as a panic button for the Thunder as it is that the people online are making it to be. But I do want to give the Spurs their flowers because, like we said at the beginning of the season, we had them as the sixth seed and coming into this year, and they completely overdid that and just put on a fantastic show.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think it's still kind of surreal to me that Wemby and the Spurs actually won because up until probably the final 2 minutes of that game, there was never a point at any point during the season or during the series where I thought the Spurs were going to win, like the win the whole series. I never at any point thought that the Thunder weren't going to make it back to the finals. I mean, I had them repeating the entire year. And the fact that the Spurs were able to win, especially in Oklahoma City, is insane to me. This Spurs team, I mean, they're legit. I'm excited to see what they can do. One point that I feel like I kind of need to make, Bruce talked about it a little bit. So obviously, a lot of people are panicking. The Thunder need to trade Chet, and the Thunder need to make some big moves, and maybe do a panic trade for Giannis or somebody like that. I'm not going to go that far, obviously, but I am really interested to see because this is going to be what, the eighth year in a row, I think, where we're not having a repeat champion. And it kind of felt like if there was one team to break that streak, it was the Thunder. So I am interested to see what they do from here, if anything. I mean, obviously, if the Thunder were healthy, if Jalen Williams played, if AJ Mitchell played, maybe we're talking a different series, but fact of the matter is they didn't, and you don't always know when you're going to make it back if you're even going to. I mean, I feel like the Thunder probably will, but I'm interested to see what happens from here on out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I picked the Thunder in seven. But it was just a total coin flip. But yeah, seeing the Spurs go to the finals already with Wemby in his third year was totally surreal. And yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from this series is just like we've kind of talked about it all year, but just how much Wemby can break an opposing team's offense. You can't attack the rim against him, and he's super switchable. He can wreak havoc off the ball as well. And then, yeah, if you just have like bad shooters, I feel like that's such a disadvantage going against Wemby, just based on what he can do as a shot blocker. But in general, I do think like the Spurs supporting cast needs to get their flowers for how well they performed. You guys mentioned most of the guys, but I think that backcourt trio of Castle, Fox, and Harper was just tremendous. And I know Castle kind of got off to a rocky start. Fox didn't have his best overall series, but they all really showed up in Game 7. I mean, in general, I feel like that's such a huge advantage to have three high level ball handlers that can get to the rim, and then the 3 point shooting duo of Champagny and Vassell is incredible, and they're also both really high level defenders. So I do feel like it's just such a perfectly constructed roster around Wemby, and I don't want that to get lost. But yeah, I am super interested to see what OKC does, and I do agree with you guys. Like, we shouldn't be totally panicking after what was, let's be honest, kind of a disappointing series, especially from Chet. He's gonna get really most of the criticism, and rightfully so. He didn't perform well. But I don't think there's any reason to go like over the top with potentially trading him or trading J Dub. I feel like that's just a little bit too much. The bigger picture is that they went to 7 games with a 60 plus win Spurs team who was awesome, and they were a couple possessions away from winning it, despite being down two of their four best players and two of their three best shot creators. AJ Mitchell and J Dub. I think those injuries were enormous, and you don't like to play the what if game, but I do think there's a strong chance we'd be talking about a Thunder Knicks series if just one of them was healthy. And I do want to praise Shea, who just got a ton of criticism throughout the series. I wouldn't say it was his best series by any means, but I was impressed with what he was able to do with having like zero shot creation outside of him, especially in that game 7. I thought that was one of the best games I'd ever seen from Shea. His entire career scored like 35 points, just hitting all sorts of difficult shots. So yeah, I do want to give Shea his flowers. I didn't think it was like a classic series, but what he was doing with the talent around him and going against this elite Spurs defense, I thought was pretty impressive, especially in Game 7.
I agree, and I also want to give a shout out to one of my favorite players in the NBA because he really stepped up in the series as well for the Thunder, and that was Cason Wallace, who had a really big Game 7 as well. Their second best offensive option, hitting a lot of threes, and he is one of like those kind of like perfect fit players, I think, in this modern NBA because not only is he going to kind of give you that hustle on the defensive end, be that kind of perfect point of attack defender and kind of disrupting those opponents' offensive guys, but also he can work as that catch and shoot specialist, work on the perimeter, and kind of bring a lot of value, not only with that, but also as a playmaker as well. I really think that he had a big series this season, and I think that's going to help out for the OKC and for the future as well with his development as well. But I do think that there are going to be some questions with this OKC team with them nearing the second apron on guys like maybe like Aaron Wiggins or Isaiah Joe, Lou Dort, Isaiah Hartenstein. Those kind of guys might be the ones that get cut or replaced with like a Thomas Sorber or with the 2 picks at the Thunder have. Maybe they trade up, or maybe they take 2 selections to kind of fill in some of those replacements. Those are kind of the changes that I could see, like similar to your point, Eamon, talking about really not really trading Chat or trading J-Deb. I think it's a little too early for them to kind of do that, specifically after, they just won the NBA Finals and were, like we said, so close, a couple possessions away from making the NBA Finals once again with two of their best offensive creators out.
I just wanted to say this real quick. My concern, I'm not really concerned. I don't want the Thunder to be good, but my concern, if I'm a Thunder fan, is there's a very real chance they lose Isaiah Hartenstein this summer because he has, I think, like a 25, $28 million team option, and I can't imagine OKC picking that up. Um, but he's been a huge part of what they've been doing. And he's, I think, technically replaceable. They can find centers that are better than Isaiah Hartenstein, but he was a huge part of their defensive identity. He's becoming undefeated at floaters now. I don't know where that came from. Like, he's a big part of what they're doing. And he was also a big part of New York's success during his final season there, too. So, I mean, yeah, he can technically go and they can probably technically find somebody that is better, but that's not going to be easy. And I feel like he was kind of the needle mover for OKC. Maybe it was Alex Caruso, but Hartenstein was a huge get for them. So if he does end up leaving this summer, and I was listening to I almost said Ben Simmons. I was listening to the Bill Simmons podcast earlier today, and he brought up a good point. He mentioned Antoine Walker, he mentioned Clyde Drexler, but there are a lot of players who have a bad finals run or a bad playoff run, and they're just never the same after that. And it's way too early to put Chet in that category. But Wemby clearly has his number, and I mean, that's not an easy thing to come back from. Now, I feel like his situation is different because he already has the championship. He's still very young, obviously, but if Chet hypothetically in Bizarro Land isn't the same player and never actually gets back to where he can be, and Hartenstein leaves, that's a huge loss for OKC. And I feel like that's way more detrimental than, or that would be way more detrimental than a lot of people are kind of realizing, I guess.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought up iHeart there. I thought he was tremendous this series. Him and Jalen Williams, not J Dub, but J Will, I thought were their best two options on Wemby by far. But yeah, you really need somebody next to Chet who has that physicality, as we've seen Chet not just in this series but really throughout his career struggle with that physicality aspect. And then especially when you're playing in against Wemby, you need a center like iHeart. And throughout the series, I just kept thinking like he is just a perfect role player, complementary piece for this team. And really, throughout the league, I've always talked about how much I love rim running centers, but I feel like the Hartenstein archetype is like almost my favorite because of what he brings as a passer, interior threat, and then just that defensive physicality. Even though he's not super switchable, I think he's just super valuable. And yeah, that team option is going to be big. I think ideally for them, they can re-sign him like just a notch below 20 million a year, but potentially a team like the Lakers, who has a lot of cap space, could go out and sign him, and they need a center, obviously. So I do think there is a path where they lose him, and I do think that would be a significant loss. But yeah, to Bruce's point about moving off of a Lou Dort, which I think is just kind of a no-brainer at this point. He is like a 17, $18 million team option. Had a rough year. Can't shoot the ball anymore. So I think you got to decline that, and then you got to explore moving off of an Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, open up like $20-ish million in cap space there, and then I think that would make getting under the apron easier, and then that does make it feasible for you to re-sign Hartenstein. But if they can't bring him back, I do think there could be a scenario like ultimately I think they have a million picks, they have a super deep roster, they're going to be fine in the long run. But I do think if they can't re-sign Hartenstein, to your point, Yuli, like we could see them just take a slight step back next season because he was such a ceiling raiser for this team a couple years ago, and I think, like I said, he's just essential next to Chet.
Yeah, I agree. And I felt bad like when I was watching this series, obviously like we if you haven't seen the predictions, we all had the Thunder winning. And like Eli's point, like going into this game, I had the Thunder winning this whole entire time and I was like, wow, we're gonna get to see Isaiah Hartenstein play his former team in the Knicks for a championship. That's gonna be super cool. And then now, instead of that, Jeremy Sohan just gets to be the luckiest dude on earth because unfortunately, I think nobody is happier than that man right now for this opportunity coming up for him. But like you guys mentioned, Isaiah Hartenstein was just an absolute physical beast and has kind of grown to be in that. I know he played for like the Clippers a little while back in the day, and he was kind of like one of those kind of like interesting backup bigs that never really got an opportunity. Then he goes to New York, kind of finds himself, and then he comes over to the Thunder and just really reinvents himself, shapes himself perfectly for this Thunder team. And like you mentioned, I think that I never really thought of them losing Hartenstein and having Chet have a bad season like this could really kind of set them back that way. But to Eli's point, I think that is a huge point. Maybe something that we could see maybe another team in the Western Conference, like if they were to grab an Isaiah Hartenstein, kind of maybe move up the ladder compared to the Thunder.
Yeah, most definitely. I think it's going to be a super interesting offseason for OKC. I would say they're probably like one of the 4 or 5 teams I'm most interested to see what they do. But ultimately, I still do think they're positioned to win multiple championships with this core, and I do think it's them and the Spurs league for the next 10 or so years. I don't want to overreact and say, oh, this is just an inevitable Spurs dynasty and the Thunder have no chance. I think that's a little bit foolish. All right, yeah, I think we can start with the Spurs side of things. Where do you guys see this path to winning? And yeah, what's the blueprint here for the Spurs to win a championship?
So as we kind of saw before the teams had been announced, we for the winner of the Western Conference to see who the Knicks would play, we did find out the news that Mitchell Robinson is going to be out for part of this series, if not the entire series. There's no really like timetable on his return, but we do know he suffered an injury. And for the Spurs, it's going to be using Wemby to attack the paint like they do against every other team, right? They're not going to be going up against Chet and Hartenstein. They're going to be going up against Cat and Huck 40. Is that who we're throwing in there? Are we gonna say Josh Hart is gonna be playing some center minutes and playing some small ball five for this team? Like, what is that solution to really stopping Wemby? I feel like that's kind of one of those big questions for the Knicks. They obviously have the wings like OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges that they can kind of use as well. But I do think for the Spurs, obviously using Wemby's size in the paint to kind of create and destroy havoc is going to be a big part for them to win this series. Obviously, we know the 3-point shooting that came alive in Game 7 was really huge for them to win as well. So I do think a lot of those guys like Devin Vassell, like you mentioned, Eamon, Julian Champagnie, we might even have to have a Harper or a Cassel or Fox really good 3-point explosion game as well alongside those guys to really help them power it through to kind of match some of those 3-pointers that the Knicks do take with some of their ability with some of their wing shooters and even guys like Deuce McBride and stuff like that. I do think physicality is going to be a main part for this series for the Spurs as well. I think they're going to have to use that to their advantage to kind of disrupt some sort of this Knicks team because I do think the Knicks are going to be wanting to play a lot of physicality with this Spurs squad and kind of using that to their advantage with some of the Spurs players kind of being inexperienced in this moment. Obviously, we know that Harper's just a rookie, Castle's a second-year player, Wemby's his third year, making the NBA Finals. The lights might be a little bit too bright for some of them in some of these instances. So, kind of going at that and trying to deal with that is going to be a big point for the Spurs. But I think using Wemby to his best ability, using him on both ends of the floor, and then ultimately having some good 3-point shooting from those guys on the perimeter is going to be a big case for the Spurs to win this series.
Yeah, I feel like for me, there's kind of two main things that I'm paying attention to. Number one is the depth advantage that San Antonio has, and number two is how they're going to attack Jalen Brunson because they have so many different options. They have so many ways to take Jalen Brunson out of the game. Largely, Stephon Castle and Dylan Harper. And I'm just gonna call it like it is. If the Spurs can contain Jalen Brunson or outright stop him, like I don't see a world where the Knicks win. Obviously, that's easier said than done, but I think if they can find a way to just make life difficult for Jalen Brunson, which I feel pretty confident they will, or at least can, they at least can. Uh, that's going to be, I think, the ultimate game changer for them. But also, the Spurs have so much depth, and we saw last year with Indy, with OKC, how important it is now to have depth in the finals. We used to live in a world where you would cut your rotation to 8 players or so, and that was fine. But now teams are going 10 deep because having depth and being able to keep your top guys as fresh as possible while still being able to win the minutes they're not on the court is huge now. And the Spurs have that depth that I just don't feel super confident the Knicks have. I also realize I'm probably giving away too much about my opinion. But I just feel like the Spurs depth is going to be a game changer and their ability to kind of attack Jalen Brunson and make life difficult for him on his offensive side of the ball. That's going to be the key to victory, I think, for San Antonio.
Yeah, most definitely. I agree with both those points you guys made. I think just establishing that paint presence, both from Wemby and the guards, will be massive. Against Karl Anthony Towns, who, to his credit, has played really solid defense throughout this playoff run. But I think that's just going to be a massive advantage and something they didn't totally have against the Thunder, but they still got to the paint a bunch against the Thunder. But yeah, it's just a whole different monster compared to when you're going up against Chet and Ihart. I think it just makes it so much easier, and then establishing that driving kick game, getting Vassell and Champagnie some nice looks will be huge. And then, yeah, defensively, I feel like the combination of Wemby and this elite Spurs perimeter defense is going to be just a massive advantage, and I think it can make life super difficult for Jalen Brunson, to your point, Elie. So, yeah, I think it's a pretty clear blueprint there. yeah, in terms of just Steph Castle, Devin Vassell, Dylan Harper, De'Aaron Fox, they just have so many options with size that you can throw on Brunson. And especially in these past two series, the Cavs and the Sixers just didn't have a natural matchup for Brunson. And I feel like that was a huge reason why the Knicks were able to pull off a sweep in both series. And obviously, the Knicks played fantastic, but I think it's just going to be kind of a wake up call when you're going up against one of the best, if not the best, perimeter defense in the NBA compared to the last two rounds where they just didn't have that same juice. And then I think this is also going to be big against Cat when you look at Wemby inside. Cat's been huge for the Knicks throughout the series or throughout the playoff run. Obviously, his playmaking has been great, but I do wonder how much Wemby can limit that. I do think we're going to see him on Josh Hart a lot, Roman, and I feel like potentially in terms of like playmaking and that high post aspect, I feel like Wemby could take some of that away. He could take away some shots at the rim for Cat, obviously. So I feel like that's just going to be a massive advantage. And yeah, I think Wemby just breaks so much. But at the same time, I don't want to discount the Knicks. So with that being said, let's flip the question: where is the Knicks' blueprint to win? And yeah, what do you see as some potential advantages there for them?
So I think they got to kind of take a point from the Suns playbook from earlier in the season, where when the Suns kind of stopped Wembanyama, they used some of those smaller bodies and kind of like used a roamer and kind of figured it out that way. And I do think that that's how they're going to use try to be able to kind of limit him, especially without Mitchell Robinson and having that double big presence being so viable that they could kind of use. Like I mentioned, Josh Hart, I think, is going to be one of those kind of primary guys that's going to be on him. Maybe an OG and Obi Mikal Bridges trying to just stunt the ability for Wemby to kind of get into the paint, get his touches, and then find his comfortable shots. I also think, to Eli's point where he mentioned how the Spurs are going to be able to kind of try to limit Jalen Brunson. I think a big part of for the Knicks' success is obviously going to be getting Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns in that two-man game and trying to find that success on the San Antonio Spurs, excuse me, working that offense and also having guys like Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby really step up. I think they're going to have really big series because I do think with Karl Anthony Towns playing against the guy in Victor Wembanyama, it's going to be very hard for him to kind of find a lot of offensive prowess. So I do think a guy like OG Anunoby or Mikal Bridges might have to be that second best option on offense every single night for this Knicks team to really capitalize and take that step into the glory of winning an NBA championship this year.
Yeah, I think to kind of piggyback off of that a little bit, the Knicks have it defensively. Like they are at their best, which they have been at their best. They're a fantastic defensive team. They can make life difficult for anybody. And because of what they can bring from a physicality perspective, I do think they actually can make things a little bit more difficult for Wemby. And on the flip side, kind of like I was saying about how if you can contain Jalen Brunson, San Antonio will be in a good spot. If the Knicks can do anything to make Victor Wembanyama uncomfortable, they're in a good spot. Because on top of that, I had to look it up to make sure what the stat was. But according to NBA.com, the Knicks are shooting 40% from deep in the postseason, and that's the lead. The next closest, or like the second best, was the Lakers, who shot 38.5%, but they've been out of the picture for a while. The Knicks are a team that can do it on both sides of the ball, and they have what I don't think San Antonio has as much. San Antonio has it, but not to the same way. The Knicks have the momentum. Like they just swept Cleveland, who's a very talented team. I know we kind of make jokes like you can't trust Cleveland in the playoffs, and we're reminded of why. But this is a very talented Cavaliers team. They swept them. To say they swept the 76ers would almost be doing it dirty. Like they swept them twice. They killed them that much in the series. It wasn't close at any point. And that's a 76ers team that, we know beat the Celtics and made their life difficult. And this is a Knicks team that beat a Hawks team who many people had pulling off the upset. They beat them in 6 games. And if I'm not mistaken, the 2 games they lost were by a combined like 3 points. So there's a world right now, a 3 point difference where the Knicks are undefeated going into the finals. They have momentum. Like obviously the Spurs do too. They just slayed the Giant. Like I get all that. But the Knicks are rolling right now, and they're going to have that rest that the Spurs don't have. The Knicks do have a lot going for them. I just I feel like for them to win this series, it's going to have to come down to just being physical, making Wemby's life hard, as difficult as possible, and continuing to hit their threes because that's going to be, I think, probably their key to victory against the Spurs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're looking at a team who's coming into the finals on an 11 game win streak and coming off two back-to-back sweeps, obviously, you have to give them a chance. And I do think there are some ways in this matchup where they do have a path to win it. I definitely do like that 3 point shooting point there, Ely, because if you're looking at a way to beat the Spurs, you have to outshoot them. They're not the best 3 point shooting team on offense. And then if you're looking at a way to offset the Wemby advantage, it's just to drain a bunch of threes. And I feel like the Knicks are better positioned than most teams to do that. I am a little bit concerned about Josh Hart in this series. Like I mentioned, I think Wemby's just going to roam off of him a bunch. But when you look at Landry Shamet and how he's playing throughout the playoffs, especially in that last round, I do trust him in this spot to sort of take over for Hart if Hart struggles or if he's almost like played off the floor. So I think the 3 point shooting thing is probably their biggest advantage. And then when you look at Garden Wemby potentially, I definitely like the point that Bruce made about throwing OG on him. I think OG is probably one of the better equipped defenders across the league to guard him, just because of how physical he is. He obviously doesn't have the same size that Wemby does, but he can match up with bigger players. And then you look at potentially throwing Towns on him. I do worry about the discipline, but I feel like that's a nice other wrinkle that they can utilize. Josh Hart potentially, if his offense permits him to play for long enough, I do think could be another option there. Mitchell Robinson, I think, is a solid option. The pinky injury is a concern, but he is expected to play, so I feel like you do have to mark him as at least a potential threat there, and he is a great defender in his own right. So I do feel like they have a lot of options. Do I trust it to totally work? No, not necessarily, but I do see some clear paths to them winning. And then when you look at OG and McCall, I feel like in terms of getting them involved on offense, that will be vital. Continuing this egalitarian style of offense that has really worked throughout the playoffs. But also on defense, I do feel like despite how the Spurs have gotten here and how well this backcourt has played, it is a backcourt that doesn't have a ton of experience. And when you're going up against two elite perimeter defenders and OG and McHale, and obviously we think OG is going to guard Wemby a lot, but he's going to be guarding the guards a lot as well, and then Josh Hart even to a lesser extent. I do think they have a lot to make life difficult. I think De'Aaron Fox will be massive in this series for the Spurs. We can talk about that in a second, but yeah, I do have certain concerns about like Steph Castle. We saw some of the turnover problems. I think if the Knicks can force some turnovers, obviously that would be massive, and that's another path for them to win in. So I don't want to discount the Knicks at all. I do think they have a strong chance in the series, and it wouldn't shock me at all if they pulled off the upset. But yeah, I think we can shift gears a little bit. I guess let's stay with the Knicks side of things for now and just talk about our single biggest X factor for the Knicks to pull off this upset and win it all for the first time since the 70s.
All right, so you might laugh, but you mentioned him just 2 seconds ago, Landry Shamet. I mean, Landry Shamet, I remember watching him on the Suns and just being like, I don't really get what's going on with Landry Shamet. And then every Suns fan has just been talking about how he's just been popping off for the New York Knicks. Why couldn't he do this with the Phoenix Suns? And it's kind of crazy. Like the 3 point shooting is really nice. You mentioned also the defense and the hustle and the way that he can actively like disrupt players is also very valuable. And I do think, like to Eli's point, that this Knicks team does lack a lot of depth, and they're going to have some of these guys kind of come through the cracks and kind of uh, stay at that level to kind of be able to bolster through to win this championship. And if a guy like Deuce McBride is having a bad game, or like you mentioned, maybe a guy like Josh Hart isn't really playable on the offensive end, then a guy like Landry Shamet might have to be, the fifth or sixth best player for this New York Knicks team for them to actually have a chance of winning a game. And he can sway the tide with, like we've seen in the playoffs where he has games where he's just like 3 for 3, just instantaneously. And you're like, okay, Landry Shamet, like what is going on? Like, I just think that those types of performance are going to be needed for the Knicks to kind of match some of that 3 point shooting from the Spurs, even though they do have that solid perimeter defense. I do think the Spurs will be able to kind of be able to get those shots up and have some high volumes, even with Wemby pulling from deep and stuff like that, like we saw versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. So for me, I think Landry Shamet is kind of like one of those kind of like blue collar like role players for this Knicks team that really needs to have a hell of a series for them to be able not be able to have a shot, but to have a really high chance of winning this series. And I think regardless of the fact it's going to be a close series, but I do think if the Knicks have those depth pieces really do stand out, then it will look a lot different.
I think I like the Shamit pick. Think I think I'm gonna go with OG Anunoby. I think that's my pick because obviously we know how important he is to the team defensively, but also I just looked it up. He's shooting 48.3% from three in the playoffs. Um, that's crazy. That's like he's shooting almost 50% from three on I just looked it up on 4.8 attempts per game. Uh, which is insane. And if he can do anything like that against the Spurs, kind of like I was saying earlier about how it's important for the Knicks to uh, be to continue being a threat from three, kind of like Eamon, like you were saying, they got to outshoot the Spurs in this series. OG is going to be a huge part of that, but he's also going to be a big part of what they do defensively to try and stop Wemby and all these other guys on the team too. So I think I'm going to go with OG as my X factor.
Yeah, I think those are two really good ones. I think you can go in so many different directions with the Knicks. I'm kind of having a hard time deciding, but yeah, I think Shamit's going to be big, especially in the event, which I consider the likely event that Josh Hart isn't hitting threes and he's potentially not closing games for them. And then, yeah, OG I think is going to be huge as that extra Wemby defender, as the perimeter defender, as an initiator and creator in this offense. I think he's going to be massive. Cat's one guy I'm potentially looking at, especially with this Wemby matchup. I think that's going to be kind of a challenging matchup for him. Can he continue to be this offensive hub? That's a question I have. Mitchell Robinson, how impactful is he going to be despite the injury? I know, like, it's not like he's a shooter, obviously, so it's not as big of a deal, but I think his, like, 15, 20 minutes of per game can be massive and it can really swing things in the Knicks' favor. Just his energy, his rebounding, and could that be affected by the injury is a question I have. But yeah, ultimately, I think I'm going to go with Mikal Bridges here. I think if you look at just the biggest idea of how this offense is rolling, it's when Mikal Bridges is rolling. And you look at earlier when they go down 2-1 against the Hawks back in April, and Mikal Bridges is having just a really rough time. He's not involved in the offense. The ball movement isn't great, and he's just kind of struggling. I feel like if the Knicks find themselves in a hole, I feel like it could be paired with Mikal Bridges struggling and the Knicks offense as a whole just not having a ton of success. I think they need his extra creation, his extra 3-point shooting, to really beat the Spurs defense. And then his perimeter defense, I think, is going to be huge as well because he's probably going to be the guy you throw on Cassel or maybe Fox or even Harper, whoever has the hot hand there. I feel like he's going to be potentially their primary stopper with OG guarding Wemby a little bit more. So I think he's their biggest win factor. I just think when you look at how this offense has turned around, it's not a coincidence that it's also been Mikal turning things around and him playing some of the best basketball of his season and proving that he's worth all these picks. And he's had some really great moments. It feels like every time they get into a close game, he makes a couple of big shots or makes a couple of big stops. But he is also an inherently inconsistent and erratic player. So I do feel like that's always going to be a question mark with this team. And I have him as my biggest X factor as a result. But yeah, same question on the Spurs side of things. Who are you guys looking at as your biggest X factor for San Antonio?
So my player is going to be someone that I have not even mentioned for these last couple of moments, and I feel terrible not mentioning them because Game 7 they had a very big performance where they had some big 3-point shots made, and that's going to be Keldon Johnson, the former Sixth Man of the Year. I feel like for the Spurs team, like we talked about Vassell, we talked about Champagne, we talked about the guards, but like these wing players, especially, have to really shine for the Spurs team. I think to kind of match the physicality with the guys like OG Anunoby, with Mikal Bridges, and a guy like Keldon Johnson. I think is going to have to be a big component for that for the Spurs. Obviously, his 3-point shot has been kind of weary throughout the playoffs. Like he has had some big moments where Game 7 he had 11 points. Game 5 he also had 15 points. But then, like his some of his games he does go kind of quiet. So kind of like Mikal, where you know sometimes he can show up, sometimes he can't be there. I think he's going to have to be a lot more consistent in this finals run to really be that X factor. But he's someone that I could see really help this team kind of take that leap. He's also, pretty solid rebounder, can help out down low. He's going to, he can make some flashy dunks as well. So I do think that a guy in Keldon Johnson is going to be one of those like big pieces for the Spurs to kind of help them when guys like maybe Wemby struggling on the offensive end, or maybe a guy like Champagnie isn't having a good shooting night. They're going to have to kind of trust some of those other players. And I feel like Keldon Johnson, similar to a guy in Landry Shamet, kind of has to play that kind of like X factor bench role to kind of really be effective for this team. And I do think, like to Elie's point, the depth is going to matter. So for the Spurs, for them to have a really good playoff series, I think when some of those guys aren't hitting from all cylinders, other guys are going to need to step up. And I think Johnson might be one of those guys for the Spurs this series.
I think I like the Keldon Johnson pick too, especially if what we saw in the fourth quarter of Game Seven is going to be kind of a sign of what he's going to do in the finals. I think that's going to be huge. I think from mine, I'm just going to keep it kind of simple. I'm probably going to go with Stephon Castle. I feel like he's probably going to be the primary defender on Jalen Brunson. And again, kind of like I was saying before, that's going to be probably the Spurs' most important factor, what they can do to stop or contain Jalen Brunson. And a lot of that uh, falls on, I probably Castle. I mean, I know Harper and them are going to get some run, but I imagine it's going to be Stephon Castle mostly. And if he can do what we know he can do, at least defensively, even if he only does it defensively, I think he's going to be one of the most important players in this series. And obviously, he's looked just good overall all season long and in and in the playoffs up to this point. I think his ability to impact the game in pretty much every area is going to be huge against this Knicks team that can again make an impact themselves on every side of the ball or on both sides of the ball. So I think I'm going to go with Stephon Castle. I feel like with the Spurs, you could kind of go in multiple different directions, but I feel like I'm going to rock with Castle as my guy.
Yeah, I think those are two great picks. When you look at Steph Castle, I think for me, the bigger question is if he can take care of the ball. I think defensively, obviously going against Jalen Brunson is a big challenge, and he has had a little bit of foul trouble, so maybe that could hurt him. But when you see what he did against Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, and you see Wemby in the back line, I feel pretty confident about that. But I do kind of worry about him being able to take care of the ball. When De'Aaron Fox was out for those first couple games against the Thunder, he had like 20 turnovers in 2 games, and that's like been my biggest sort of point of frustration, concern about him all season. And I do think going up against this really good Knicks perimeter defense, especially with Bridges and OG and Hart, I do think that could be a potential challenge. And I think if he has trouble taking care of the ball, I do think that could hurt them, and his overall impact could be lessened by that. So that would be my bigger concern with Castle, but the defense is also just going to be huge. I think when you're talking about beating the Knicks, you need someone to limit Brunson, and he's by far their best guy to do it. And then, yeah, I definitely agree with Keldon Johnson, too. I just think he can just be such a spark of energy for this team. And, I mean, he was the sixth man of the year for a good reason in the regular season. Playoffs, he has had some big moments, but he also has been a little bit inconsistent. And I do think, like, to Elie's point earlier about just that the Spurs' depth being a little bit better, I do think they're going to need a big series from Keldon Johnson to really prove that, because I do think the Knicks bench has stepped up a little bit. So, yeah, I definitely like both of those guys. I'm going to go with De'Aaron Fox. I kind of hinted at this earlier, and De'Aaron Fox is my guy. He is one of my 2 or 3 favorite players in the entire league. But, man, I would be lying if I said I have loved this playoffs from him. And it's clear that he's not at 100% with his ankle, so I do think that's a big reason. He does a lot of really good little things, especially for this younger Spurs team. I think he's essential, even if he isn't having a big scoring night. But when you look at just some of the attention that Castle's going to receive, and I think Fox has sort of transitioned into like this clear like third threat on the team. Maybe even like fourth with like some of the stuff Vassell has been doing in his injury. I think he's just going to draw a lot more easier matchups in this series. And I do think at the same time, despite how great Castle's been, at his absolute best, he does have a little bit more offensive juice, and especially against an easier matchup, I think they're just going to need that extra shot creation, that extra ability to attack the basket, a little bit more in this big stage. Obviously, all the Spurs young guys have been super good, so I'm not like super concerned about them like suddenly turning into pumpkins or whatever. But I do think they're just gonna need a little bit more from Fox, who just he's averaging like 15 or so points a game. I think they're gonna need him to be just closer to his all star self, and then defensively he doesn't have like a ton of responsibilities. He does play really solid defense in my eyes, but I do think that also should allow him to get going offensively. And if they can get all star level production out of him, along with whatever you're getting from Wemby, which should be amazing, Vassell and then Castle, Harper, all these guys, I do think it could turn them into like an unstoppable force. So I would like to see Fox reach another level. I do think it's kind of tricky with the ankle stuff. But yeah, given how inconsistent he's been throughout the playoffs, I do think he's a clear swing factor to me. All right, yeah. Any other thoughts on this matchup? All right. I think we can go ahead and make our official predictions then. So yeah, ultimately, I think we've broken it down pretty thoroughly on both sides. But yeah, who are you guys picking to win it all?
So I find this one very difficult to kind of pinpoint. I feel like it truly could go either way, kind of depending on how you look at it. Because to Ely's point, like you said, like the Knicks have only lost two playoff games and they're well rested, they're ready to go. Like they have this opportunity to strike and to, have that well rest, kind of similar to like how when the Celtics went into their finals versus the Mavericks, obviously a little bit different, but had a little bit of a easier path to the finals than maybe the Western Conference opponent did. But with the Spurs, like we mentioned, they just took down the juggernaut, the Thunder, the team that we all thought was going to win the NBA Finals, and the Thunder and the Spurs ultimately may very well have the best player in the world right now in Victor Wembanyama on the court, ready to go against this New York Knicks team. So it kind of is like, are you going to pick the team that has the best player and the young core to go around it, or are you kind of favoring more of a team that is kind of defensively built, veteran team that has had a little bit more rest? And ultimately, I think the experience is going to take this one for me. I think I'm going to settle with the Knicks winning this series. I do think they'll win it in 6 games. I knew that the Spurs were a 2 seed, the Knicks were a 3 seed, but it didn't cross my mind really until they said it at the podium that the Spurs will be hosting Game 1 of the NBA Finals, and I was like, oh wow, like that's actually insane, like crazy for Victor Wembanyama to have that. But I do think that the Knicks will be able to pull this out, and I think winning 6 at their home court for their fans. I just think that for the Spurs, the moment is just going to be a little bit too bright for some of their young stars. I know that Wemby will have a good series. I think that a guy in Fox will have a good one, but like you guys mentioned, maybe it is a little too bright for Harper. Maybe Castle with the turnovers is forced into some of these altercations that hinders the ability for them to kind of play, make the ball, spread it out, actually get some of their offensive sets working. And with Fox maybe not being that prolific scorer as we've seen throughout the playoffs, it could hinder them a little bit. So I'm going to go with Knicks. I'm going to say in 6 at home, and pandemonium will break out because we're not going to know if the world will be destroyed. Because if that happens, it will be insanity in New York City. But that is my prediction.
Yeah. Um, this series is so interesting to me because maybe this happens more than I'm realizing, but I feel like this is a finals matchup where both teams should feel pretty good about their chances. Like I feel like both teams should feel good against the other team because from New York's perspective, they have the momentum. Like I said before, only lost 2 games by a combined, I'm pretty sure 3 points. They are just clicking and firing on all cylinders right now. This is another pretty important one that, yeah, I know. I feel like a lot of people haven't really talked about too much. This is a Knicks team that has been battle tested. I know a lot of people love to kind of throw that term around, but this is a Knicks team that lost in the conference finals last year. If you even want to go a little bit before that, before the Carl Anthony Towns, Julius Randle trade, they lost in the second round the season before. This is a Knicks team that's been kicked down. I'm pretty sure this season they were on like an 8-game losing streak, or like this is a Knicks team that's been kicked and they're back. Like they were able to get back from that, and this is a team that's been battle tested. And I feel like that experience, obviously, Jalen Brunson's been to multiple conference finals. Carl Anthony Towns has been to multiple conference finals. OG has a ring that he won in Toronto. Um, Mike Brown, I believe, has a championship as like an assistant coach with either Golden State or Cleveland or whichever team it might be. Like this is a team that has that experience. They have been battle tested. Like I said before, they have the momentum. Uh, they have a lot going for them. And then from San Antonio's perspective, you just, like I said before, you just slayed the Giant. You eliminated the Thunder on their own home court. You have, in my opinion, the deeper team. You have home court advantage. You have the best player in this in the series, depending on who you ask, maybe the league, in Victor Wembanyama. Like both teams are in a really good spot, but only one of them can win. My gut says San Antonio in six. I could see this playing out where maybe the Knicks steal game one because of their rest versus San Antonio's not rest. I don't whatever the opposite of that would be. Um, and then maybe San Antonio wins game two, maybe game three, maybe the Knicks win game four, something like that. But I think the Spurs ultimately are gonna win in six.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your point, Elie, that both teams should feel good, and I do think there's like a clear path for both teams, and I am happy that Bruce picked the Knicks so we could have a little diversity, and we're not all gonna go with the Spurs. But yeah, with that being said, I am gonna go with the Spurs in six. I think ultimately I do care a lot about experience, so it is kind of funny, especially like if you listen to the show a lot last year, I was always a little skeptical of the Thunder because of experience, but I feel like I did learn my lesson there. And I do think like Wemby just kind of breaks all the rules, and I'm not going to be shocked at all if this guy wins a championship in his third year. But yeah, ultimately, I just think it is going to be tough for the Knicks to solve this Wemby puzzle, and we haven't seen any team really solve it. I do think Knicks, like we talked about, they do have a path with their shooting and everything, but I just think that paired with their perimeter defense is just going to be too tough for the Knicks to really get into their offense. And then on the other side of the ball, I just think the Spurs ball handlers and their shooters and Wemby's presence, I think it's just going to be too much for them to overcome. I'm going to go with, yeah, Spurs in six. I think it should be a really competitive series, and I wouldn't be shocked if the Knicks won it at all. But I just think the Wemby advantage, paired with just a perfect roster around him, is going to be enough for the Spurs to get the job done. And it would be kind of poetic if you look at it. Tim Duncan winning his first championship against the Knicks, and then going on to win five championships, being one of the best players of all time, and then Wemby potentially following suit. I think that would be absolutely poetic. Obviously, that's not the reason I'm picking them. It's more of the basketball reasons, but just a fun little note there. But yeah, it should be a really fun series either way. And I think it's a real coin toss. I'm surprised by some of the odds. The odds are like pretty heavily favoring the Spurs. So yeah, it should be super interesting. And yeah, I mean, if the Knicks win it, man, I pray for the citizens of New York City because that could be crazy. Like you said, pandemonium. But yeah, unless you guys have any other closing thoughts, I think we can wrap up the show here. Yeah, so before we officially close things out, I just want to give you guys a chance to plug your work, tell our listeners where they can find you at.
Once again, thank you, Eamon, for having us on the pod. Really do appreciate it to talk the finals, and can't wait to get into some off-season discussions as well. We talked about this before the pod, but the off-season is always fun, and I can't wait to break down all of our teams that we cover and what they could possibly do. But you can find me over on Twitter, right here where my name is at Bruce Velez. You can also check out my work at Right Side of the Sun, where I write about the Phoenix Suns. I've been doing some trade articles talking about like Suns trade verdicts on who are some players they should go after. But doing it all off season, so definitely going to be doing some more of those before the season finally ends out. So definitely check those out.
Yeah, and you can check me out. My name should be around here somewhere, Elie Deglaoui. You can find my work on chowderandchampions.com. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram. I do follow back. I know people care about that, so feel free to hit me up. This is my handle right around here. So, yeah, appreciate you having me on once again, Eamon.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys hopping on the show again, and we'll have to do it again at some point during the off season. But yeah, I'm gonna close out the episode here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.
Later.